Hi, I'm Kathy Pham, Vice President of Artificial Intelligence here at Workday. And I'm joined by Marcy Paterson, Vice President of Solutions Consulting at Blink. Welcome, Marcy.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about talent and culture and opportunities and all that surround it, especially as it relates to frontline workers.
Sure.
So HR leaders are really increasingly recognizing the strategic importance of employee experience. Can you tell me more about how technology can help HR leaders with the employee experience, especially as it relates to frontline workers?
Yeah, thanks. And, we do sort of specialize in organizations who have a large number of frontline workers. And I think for HR leaders, the first thing they need to do is acknowledge that the frontline workforce needs an employee experience.
Right.
A lot of focus, attention, investment is made on the desk-based worker.
Right.
And unfortunately, the frontline worker is left behind. So I think it's up to HR to sort of work cross-functionally with communications, with IT, with operations, in understanding what the experience is like today for the frontline worker, and then building an experience that's going to work today, but also allows us to take advantage of a lot of great things you're doing from an AI perspective. You get the platform in place, where can you take it in the future?
Yeah. It's so important. Thank you for bringing up the need for having employee experience for frontline workers when we focus so much on the desk worker and otherwise.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that we do, because if you think about organizations' frontline workforce, in many situations, that frontline workforce is who's communicating most to your customers.
Yep.
So we put so much emphasis on customer experience and customer satisfaction, and don't necessarily see that relationship that the frontline employee has to that customer satisfaction.
So part of employee experience is the ability to retain employees. Can you tell me more about how you think about the retention of employees, maybe with learning, development, other aspects of the employee experience?
Yeah, and again, when you start thinking about frontline workforces, depending on the industry, and it's definitely differs by industry, but there are certain industries that have well over 60% turnover in their frontline organizations. So you can understand sort of the operating expense, the talent acquisition processes that have to be put in place in order to manage that influx and outflow of employees. So I think it's super important from an onboarding perspective to understand what that process looks like, and to look for opportunities to improve it, starting with and where engagement, where the employee experience comes in, is as those employees are coming in, how can you create an experience that helps them feel part of the company, part of the culture, allows them to feel like they belong in a short amount of time? Because the other thing we see with frontline workforces is 90-day attrition can be a real issue. So organizations are bringing employees in and losing them within 90 days. Understanding where you're losing those employees, why, and how you can influence that through employee experience and digital employee experience, I think has a real opportunity to change some of those numbers.
Yeah. And what about continuous learning in that community? How do you think about that with?
So another interesting, a lot of research says that, I think sort of anecdotally, we believe that frontline workers are looking for higher wages. But if you look at the research, what the research says is that frontline workers are looking for development opportunities. They want to figure out how they can grow in their roles. And so again, with the right employee experience, we had a customer out in Oklahoma, and we were talking to their manufacturing workers. And they were saying they had no insight when opportunities were available. And so then once they found out about them, those opportunities had been filled. So one way to sort of better that experience for your frontline worker is giving them better visibility into those opportunities, and then sort of walking them through from a process perspective in an easy way what's required for them to get there. Because a lot of times perhaps it's a certification, they need additional training. How can we sort of feed that information to them in a simple way that allows them to take advantage of it?
Yeah, that's so great to know. So not just the continuous learning about what kind of certifications they might need, but really surfacing opportunities they would just never otherwise know. And it's so interesting to hear you share that goes even beyond wage, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when the focus is only on wage, you might miss these other ways to retain an employee.
Absolutely.
And so moving beyond that, what about recognition and appreciation?
Yeah, so this is something else. So Blink is a mobile app, and we have it on many frontline employees' mobile phones. And one of the biggest drivers of engagement, because we're obviously tracking all of these metrics and analytics on the back, you would be surprised how high recognition is from an engagement perspective, and especially peer recognition. So a lot of times we think about recognition as sort of manager down and a manager recognizing an employee, but we find that peer recognition and sort of encouraging and putting process around peer recognition drives a lot of engagement and really makes people feel good, and that helps.
Yeah. Let's go back to what you mentioned before, which was starting right from the beginning with the onboarding process. Can you talk more about the mechanics of building an onboarding process specifically for frontline workers that really set the foundation for the success and growth and retention in the future?
Yeah, and I talked about sort of that turnover at the front line, and also organizations with frontline workforces generally have, manufacturing, busing. These are a
Yep.
lot of employees that they're potentially onboarding. So you have an opportunity in HR to look at onboarding at scale with process automation. So quick example, in Blink, we have something called employee journeys, which sort of mimic a campaign where you can set up a campaign of engagement so that on an employee's first day, they get a welcome message. On their 10th day, they get a check-in. On their 30th day, they get a survey. And on their 365th day, they get a congratulations on
Right.
your first year. That's a lot to manage for a frontline manager, for an organizational head. But if you can look at ways to incorporate that using automation,
Right.
it can really help scale engagement, but still keep it personal.
Yeah. And can you help our viewers understand how that is different for frontline workers versus like a desk worker, like that process? Like, what is that the differentiating piece?
Well, one of the key differentiators, quite frankly, for the frontline workforce is a lot of organizations have no mechanism to deliver that. So there's a lot of organizations that don't have email for their frontline workers. So
Yeah.
they quite literally have no way of communicating that type of recognition
Right.
or that engagement to the front line. So maybe they're using digital signage, maybe they're trying to filter that through a manager, but on the desk, I'm sure a lot of organizations might have multiple intranets,
Right.
portals, places, and email where
Right.
I can go to receive that type of information. The frontline worker, in a lot of cases, has no way of getting that level of communication.
That's such a good reminder of the environment you're in where you might not have multiple mediums for communication. And it's just as important to communicate, just having to be creative about that.
Absolutely. And, something we haven't talked about, but when you think about the frontline workforce in particular, depending on the industry, you have a lot of workers coming in who have a very specific expectation of engagement
Right.
based on what they're using in their personal lives.
Yes.
And organizations need to acknowledge that as well and look at matching that experience to drive engagement. And so we're really looking at creative ways to allow that sort of Gen Z to connect
Right.
and communicate in the ways that they're used to.
It's such an important point to point out the matching your personal experience and your personal life to the technologies or tools or experiences you might have at work, so that that jump and that cognitive distance isn't as big. That's such a great point.
And there's cognitive dissonance across a lot of the digital employee experiences. When you create even something for the desk-based worker that doesn't translate well to the mobile.
Right.
When you create experiences that are, a frontline worker versus a desk-based worker. A desk-based worker is familiar. They've been using technology. They can onboard sort of themselves a lot faster. We need to create experience specifically for the front line and recognition of the fact that they haven't been using enterprise software their whole
Right.
lives. And so we've got to match that
Yeah.
experience that they're expecting.
Let's pull on that communication thread a bit more. So we talked about the onboarding part. The next part is now once you're here, how do we help you feel included and you belong and you're part of the culture?
Yeah.
When that communication part just might be different with this community, right? So what tools do you use?
Sure, a lot of facets to that. First of all, one of the most important ones, again, when you're thinking about the front line in particular, is language. A lot of frontline workforces may not be as comfortable speaking or being communicated to in English.
Right.
So we look to translate that information on the fly so that they can receive that information in the language that they're most comfortable in.
Right.
So that's important. And then from a communications perspective, the other thing that's critical to sort of create that communications muscle within your organization is communicating information that's relevant. So if I'm working in a manufacturing plant in Oklahoma, and we also have a plant in Chicago, I don't necessarily want to get information about the Chicago plant.
Right.
That's not applicable to me and my role. So managing the noise and using targeted communications to make sure that folks are getting the information that's relevant to them is super important.
Yeah. So we're here at Workday Rising. It's a technology conference. So let's talk a little bit about technology and what you're seeing as the next steps. For you, in your opinion, what do you see as some of the technology trends or emerging technologies
Sure.
that can really impact this community of frontline workers?
I think one of the biggest opportunities HR has today when it comes to employee engagement is, quite frankly, walking across the hall or picking up the phone and talking to their marketing counterparts, because we've leaned into target communications, understanding sentiment and analytics on the customer side through our marketing departments.
Right.
We should be putting that same level of focus on our employees. For many organizations, their employees is as important an asset as their customer.
Right.
And so there's been a lot that we've learned on the marketing side through customer engagement. Let's take some of that learning and apply it on the employee side, do that same level of analytics, and really look to drive better behaviors, improved experiences, improved communication and enablement, leveraging some of those same capabilities.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for just helping us understand so much more about what it's like to work with frontline workers. We briefly talked about the divide, right? Of how we don't
the
talk
digital
enough
divide.
about
Yeah.
frontline workers and your depth of expertise and what is needed to reach that community, as well as also drawing on our expertise in other parts of the organization, like with marketing, that we then now can also apply to frontline workers is so fascinating and helpful in this.
Yeah,
journey.
and you and I were talking before we came in about sort of essential workers, and
Yeah.
I just, for us, it's a mission.
Right.
We want to improve the experience of the frontline workforce because it's so important,
Right.
and it's important to all of us, but particularly to them.
Yeah.
So thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on that mission, and thank you so much for joining us today, Marcy.
Sure.
Yeah. And to those who are watching, next up, I'll be joined by Jason Warren, Workday Solutions Partner at Vertex, as we explore how we can empower the finance teams of the future. Stay tuned.